For those who suffer a personal injury due to someone else's carelessness, the aftermath, the immediate aftermath, can really be the hardest part. Obviously, you've been injured. There are going to be doctors, bills, time off work. The last thing you need is a lawyer or many lawyers hounding you to hire them. That can be unethical and in some ways illegal. Well, Tom Sinus from Sinus Jamis Law Firm joins us to clear up all of the details surrounding attorney solicitation, I guess is the word we should use. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Todd. How are you?
I'm well. So we see this from time to time dramatized on television about lawyers being over-aggressive. What are the rules around this?
It's a really important topic because there are some important rules, both in terms of the ethical code, that is the ethical rules that lawyers are required to follow. And then we have some state law here in Michigan as well. So let's start with the general concept in the ethical code about solicitation. And there's a specific rule on this, and it just very clearly says that a lawyer shall not solicit professional employment from a person with whom the lawyer has no family or prior professional relationship when the motive for doing so is the lawyer's pecuniary gain, meaning their desire to have the business. There's an exception there. It doesn't include things like sending truthful and non-deceptive advertising. But the basic concept here, and this is not just true for personal injury law, is that across the spectrum, lawyers are not permitted under the ethical code to go out and solicit people that the lawyer wants to have hire them. The idea here, of course, is that people should be able to decide what lawyers they want to contact on their own, and hopefully they'll do that after their own deliberation and research. And then and only then is it appropriate for the lawyer to engage in a discussion with the potential client about how the lawyer may be of service to that person. So that's the basic ethical rule, and it's true for all lawyers in Michigan, and it's true for all kinds of practices of law.
I can only imagine that would be extremely stressful surrounding a car crash. Car crashes are traumatic experiences. Are there any special rules regarding those?
There is. That basic rule on solicitation applies, but we have a specific state statute that deals with car crash victims and provides them protections against being contacted within the first 30 days after a motor vehicle crash. And so here's what the statute says. A person shall not intentionally contact any individual that the person knows has sustained a personal injury as a result of a motor vehicle crash, or a family member of that person, with a direct solicitation to provide service until 30 days after the motor vehicle accident. Again, there are a couple of exceptions. Notably here, this doesn't just apply to lawyers, because if you review what I just read, it includes all people. That is, people are not allowed to directly solicit someone else within that 30-day period after a motor vehicle accident. So then that sort of raises the question, well, what is direct solicitation? And the statute goes on to say that that includes verbal or written offers, including by electronic means, so not just the mail, made to the injured person or their family, seeking to provide a service or fee for money based on the knowledge that the person has been in an automobile accident. So that's very broad. And if you step back and think, okay, that covers a lot of people. It covers a lot of people who are not supposed to be doing certain things, lawyers amongst them. And it applies to a lot of people. It applies to anyone in this group that has been in motor vehicle accidents. And it gives them that protection not to be contacted within that 30-day period. And violating this statute, if it's a lawyer, of course, there's the ethical rule that we talked about, but violating this statute, regardless of who you are, is punishable as a misdemeanor, even as a first offense. So this is really important for people to know, because if they're involved in a car crash and they're receiving this type of direct solicitation, those solicitations may very well be unethical and illegal.
And what should people do if they are receiving those? I mean, that's a great, obvious follow-up question. What should we do?
Well, first and foremost, don't act upon them, right? If you haven't contacted the lawyer or don't want to engage the lawyer, you should not feel that you have to reciprocate that communication in any way. Secondly, I'd recommend that people think about, well, is this the kind of person I want to do business with, someone that is coming and actively pursuing me in a way that may be unethical or illegal. And number three, really step back and think, how do I want to make this decision? Do I want to make this decision based on my own research, maybe talking to friends or family who have been down a road like this before, maybe talking to other people I trust within my community? Or do I want to feel like I'm sucked into something where I'm being hustled to do something that I may not be ready to do? And so I think this decision here about engaging a lawyer, whether it's in a car crash or anything else, is one that I would recommend that people make with the kind of care and deliberation that you would make for any other important decision. I mean, step back and think, would you hire a doctor under circumstances like we're talking about? Or would you go the route of word of mouth and research? I think most people would choose the latter. And that's how most people choose important things in their life. And choosing your lawyer, regardless of your legal circumstance, particularly if you've been seriously injured, is a big decision. And so I think if people encounter this type of stuff, the best advice is to step back, to step away, take a moment. And if they feel that what they're being provided violates some of these legal rules, they can contact law enforcement. They can contact the state bar as well.
Great advice as always, Tom. And of course, I have to ask this question. Does Michigan's no-fault auto insurance have anything to do with this as well?
Yes, the change in law actually allows an auto insurance company to collect an attorney fee against a lawyer who violates these solicitation rules. And so that's obviously a warning for attorneys who shouldn't be engaged in this stuff to begin with, but it should also be an added warning for people involved in motor vehicle accidents, because those people may very well end up being questioned by an insurance company or an insurance company lawyer about how they obtained their lawyer, because the insurance company lawyer here or insurance company may be wanting to seek attorney fees if the way that that relationship developed was in violation of these solicitation rules. So it's just another reason to be mindful of these rules and to go about this decision in a deliberate way.
Well, if anyone has any questions and wants them answered, where can they get a hold of you?
They can find us online at www.sinusdramus.com. They can email us at info@sinusdramus.com, or they can give us a call in West Michigan at 616-301-3333.